She was asleep on my couch. That was the first thing. The second thing was that she was my work rival. I had come home at 9:30 on a Wednesday. The kind of evening where you've been in back-to-back meetings since 8 in the morning, eaten nothing since a granola bar at noon, and your only plan for the night involves shoes off, lights low, silence. And instead of silence, there was Mara Chen, curled sideways on my couch cushions with her blazer folded over herself like a blanket and her phone face up on my coffee table, screen dark, as though she'd sat down to wait and simply run out of night to wait in. I stood in my own doorway for a moment with my keys still in my hand, processing. Mara Chen. The person who had taken the Harwood account from me 2 years ago, or taken credit for it, which I had spent 2 years believing was the same thing. The person who had been promoted to senior associate 3 months before I was, and walked past my desk the morning after the announcement with an expression I'd classified, at the time, as deeply satisfied. The person my director Derek had been invoking at every quarterly review as the benchmark I was perpetually not quite clearing, the way Mara handled the pitch deck, Mara's approach to client retention, the methodology Mara applied to the Callaway brief, until her name had acquired a specific texture in my head, the texture of a standard that kept moving just slightly ahead of wherever I'd arrived. That person was asleep in my apartment. There was a reasonable explanation. There had to be. I walked quietly to the kitchen, set down my bag, and crossed the hall to knock on the door of my neighbor Greta, who answered in her bathrobe and reading glasses with the expression of someone who'd been expecting exactly this visit. She said she was a friend, Greta said, before I'd finished opening my mouth. She had ID. She knew your full name and your floor, and the thing about the broken intercom buzzer. She paused. She looked like she needed somewhere to sit. I let her in about 2 hours ago. Did she say what she needed? Greta considered this with the particular care of someone determined to be accurate. She said she had something you needed to know before tomorrow morning, and she said, another pause, that if she waited in the hallway she'd lose her nerve. I thanked Greta and went back inside. Lose her nerve. Mara Chen, who had walked into a board-level presentation I'd been excluded from and delivered a 30-minute pitch with the controlled confidence of someone who experiences nerves only theoretically, was apparently capable of losing them entirely. That single detail sat in my chest, asking a question I couldn't yet answer. I looked at her on my couch. Dark hair, disheveled, one shoe half off. The blazer blanket had slipped and she hadn't moved to fix it, which meant she was genuinely asleep, not performing unconsciousness for purposes I didn't want to imagine. The shadows under her eyes weren't makeup or shadow. They were the specific kind that come from days rather than hours of insufficient sleep, the kind that doesn't wash away between evenings. On my coffee table, beside her phone, there was a folder. Manila, thick, the elastic band stretched to its absolute limit. She'd placed it where I'd see it immediately, so that if I came home and she was asleep, the first thing I'd encounter was the folder. She'd planned for the possibility of not being awake. I didn't open it. Not yet. I sat down in the chair across from her and looked at it, and I thought about all the ways I had explained Mara to myself over 2 years, the assumptions built into the architecture of how I moved through every workday, and how completely and how quietly certain I had been of all of them. She woke up about 10 minutes later, not gradually, all at once, eyes open, immediately oriented, the way a person wakes up when they've been running on adrenaline and sheer will, and there's nothing left to burn through. She looked at me, then at the folder on the table, then back at me with an expression I had no category for, because in 2 years of occupying the same rooms as Mara Chen, I had learned to read her face in the context of professional competition, which meant I had built an entire vocabulary for what she looked like when she was preparing to present, preparing to push back, or preparing to do nothing and let you mistake the silence for agreement. I had no vocabulary for what she looked like sitting in my apartment in wrinkled clothes, having apparently needed somewhere to sit badly enough to ask a stranger to let her in. What she looked like, I realized, was tired. Not the performed tiredness of someone managing an image, but the actual and structural tiredness of someone who has been holding something heavy for too long and has decided tonight is the night to set it down. He filed the complaint this afternoon, she said. That was the first thing she said. I didn't ask which complaint. I had a slow, cold understanding that there was only one complaint she could mean, For 2 weeks I'd been aware, in the way you become aware of something you're not ready to name, that something was shifting in how Derek moved around me. The quarterly feedback that came back with language I didn't recognize as describing the project I'd actually delivered. The meeting last Thursday where I'd walked in and the room had adjusted, not dramatically, just a small recalibration of energy, barely perceptible, the kind that registers below conscious awareness and then sits in your chest for days asking questions you don't know how to form. The email Derek sent the Friday before, copied to 3 people above him on the org chart requesting a formal check-in on resource allocation and conduct protocols, the kind of sentence that is never about resource allocation and conduct protocols. I had been waiting for the next thing. I had not known what shape it would take. What complaint, I said, because I needed her to say it clearly. HR, she said. She sat up fully, took her blazer off the armrest, put it on with the precision of someone putting their armor back on. Not hurried, just necessary. Formal misconduct, 4 pages. Filed this afternoon at 3, meeting scheduled for tomorrow at 9 with Officer Hendricks. She looked at me directly. I know because he accidentally CC'd the whole internal team thread when he forwarded the confirmation. He was trying to reach one person. He hit reply all. I don't think he knows I saw it. I stood up, because sitting felt wrong. And you came here because you need to know what's in it before 9 tomorrow morning. She reached for the folder. And because I have things that can help. But I needed to be sure you'd use them. I looked at the folder. I looked at her. There was one question I needed answered before anything else. How did you know where I live? I said. She looked at the folder in her hands, then back at me. Derek gave me your address 8 months ago. I was supposed to drop off a client gift basket while you were on leave. He said he'd handle it himself, but then a conflict came up. He seemed very casual about having your home address ready to give. I didn't think about it at the time. I thought about it now. Derek with my home address. Derek having it immediately available casually to hand off. Derek filing a formal complaint this afternoon and scheduling a review for tomorrow morning and leaving exactly the kind of small window that prevents preparation. Derek knowing exactly where I live. Show me the complaint, I said. She handed me the folder with both hands. The way you hand someone something heavy when you've been carrying it for a while and understand the weight differently than they're about to. I opened it at the kitchen table. She sat across from me. Neither of us spoke while I read. The complaint was 4 pages. My name appeared in it 14 times. It documented, in the formal and clinical language of HR procedure, a series of incidents in which I had allegedly behaved in ways that were disruptive to collaborative team function, dismissive of directives from senior management, and, this was the one that settled in my chest with the most weight, verbally aggressive toward a colleague in the presence of a client, during the Meridian account review. I remembered the Meridian account review with the kind of clarity you retain for meetings that mattered. I had attended it. I had prepared for it. I had said 3 sentences and deferred on the budget question because Derek had signaled, with a look I'd learned to read over 18 months of working under him, that he wanted to handle it. I had been, by any measure I could apply, professionally unremarkable at that meeting, present, prepared, and quiet when the room required quiet. The complaint described someone I did not recognize conducting a meeting I had not attended. The Meridian Review, I said. I was there, Mara said. So was I. I know. She reached across the table and turned to the 3rd page of the folder, a separate document, attached behind the complaint. Meeting notes. Those are the official meeting notes. The version currently in the shared project system, Caned quote. She turned to the page behind it. Those are a copy I made of the original notes on the day of the meeting, before any changes were made. She set both versions side by side in front of me. Look at the 3rd line item. I looked. The original notes recorded my name next to a notation that read, Deferral to Senior Lead on Budget Q, appropriate and efficient. The official version, the one currently sitting in the system, showed a blank where my name had been, and a different notation entirely. Discussion tabled following interpersonal disruption. Someone had gone into the shared documentation system and changed what the meeting record said. My phone buzzed on the table. A calendar notification. HR meeting. Formal review. 9 a.m. Thursday. Officer, M. Hendricks. I looked at the time. 9:17 p.m. 9 a.m., I said. That's 12 hours, Mara said. I put my phone face down on the table. I did not look at it again for 40 minutes. Mara had made coffee in my kitchen. She'd found the machine during the 2 hours she'd spent waiting, which I chose to find practical rather than unsettling. She pushed a cup toward me without asking, and I took it without acknowledging that this was a strange thing for the two of us to be doing together, at 10 on a Wednesday night, with my professional future laid out on the table between us. We went through the complaint line by line. I had the advantage of knowing the actual events, every meeting as it had actually happened, what I had actually said, who had been present, and what they'd witnessed. Mara had the advantage of having been present at most of them, and of having made a habit, over the past 2 years, of writing things down and keeping copies. She was methodical. That was the thing I had not expected. I had built a version of Mara in my head over 2 years. Polished presentation, smooth client management, the professional equivalent of a perfectly ironed shirt that existed specifically to make you feel slightly less pressed. What was sitting across from me at 10 p.m. with her blazer slightly wrinkled and a manila folder thick enough to need elastic was something different. Someone who had been paying close attention for a long time and who had known, the entire time, exactly why she was paying it. "The Callaway pitch deck," I said, somewhere in the second hour. "Derek told me you'd presented work that you'd built on my initial proposal without attribution." Mara looked at me steadily. "He told me that you'd said I was using your research without credit. That you were planning to raise it formally with his supervisor. I never said that." "I know," she said. "I know that now. At the time, when I went back to look at your original proposal to check the overlap, I found that the version in the system had been," she paused, "revised." Before I could pull the comparison, I set down my coffee. There was a particular quality to the silence that followed. The specific silence of two people arriving simultaneously at the same realization, not about each other, but about the geometry of the space they'd both been living in. 2 years of carefully maintained wariness, energy spent managing a threat that had been installed in both directions from the same source. The rooms I'd walked into slightly armored, the conversations I'd kept slightly careful, slightly measured, with a person who had been doing the same thing toward me. "He changes the documents," I said. "He has administrator access to the shared project drive," she said. "Standard for his position. He uses it." I thought about every project file I'd ever saved to that system, every meeting note, every deliverable, every draft with my name on it, and a timestamp proving when I'd produced it. I thought about how many of those files I had never gone back to check. Because why would you check a file you saved yourself? Because documents are supposed to stay as you left them. "How long?" I said. "At least as long as I've been tracking it," she said. 2 years. Probably longer. The folder was thick because it was not about me alone. Mara had been building it for 2 years, not recklessly, carefully, the way you build something when you know it has to be waterproof because the person across from it is exactly the kind of person who looks for the leaks. She opened the back section and spread 5 tab dividers across the kitchen table, each labeled in her handwriting with a single first name. "Joanna left the company 18 months ago," she said. "She thought she was leaving because she wasn't performing. I spoke to her 3 months after she left, and she told me there was a formal complaint in her HR record she'd never seen until her exit interview. She described the meeting it cited. She described it the way the official notes don't." She tapped the second divider. "Rachel was transferred to the regional office." Same mechanism. The complaint, the altered documentation, a meeting that didn't happen the way the record says it did. She's still there. She's been cooperative. The third name. Pretty. Still at the company. Still waiting. She's on record with me but not ready to go further. And that's her right. The fourth. Sandra, she resigned voluntarily. I have her statement. She paused at the 5th divider. "Before my tenure at the company, there's someone I have only partial documentation on. I've been trying to reach her for 6 months. 5 names. Plus Mara. Plus me. He selects people who are performing," Mara said. "Specifically people performing well enough that, given time, they'd be above him. He doesn't do this to people who are struggling. Struggling people leave on their own without any help. He does it to people who are doing the work too well to ignore, and too well to manage through normal means." She looked at me. "He does it to people who scare him." I thought about the quarterly reviews. The benchmark. The way Mara handled this. The approach Mara took to that. He'd been installing us as standards for each other, keeping each of us perpetually within reach of a bar that stayed just ahead. Motivated by inadequacy rather than momentum. Looking horizontally at each other rather than upward at him. My phone buzzed on the table. A voicemail notification. Derek. 11:03 p.m. I put it on speaker. We both listened. His voice was warm. That was the thing about Derek. The warmth was always there, always precisely calibrated, always readable as genuine concern until you listened to it from the correct angle. Hey, just wanted to reach out before tomorrow. I know HR processes can feel intimidating, and I want you to know I'm here if you need to talk through anything before 9. I think we can resolve this very cleanly. Give me a call. He hung up. He knows I saw the email, Mara said. Yes, that's why he called. He's trying to find out how much you know and whether you're going to walk into that room prepared or not. She looked at her phone. And I think he'll try to revoke my access to the shared project drive tonight before morning. He's done it before. Cut off someone's access to team documentation right before a formal meeting so they can't pull files at the last minute. She looked at the folder on the table. Everything I have is on paper and on my personal drive, but if he locks me out tonight, I lose anything I'd need to pull from the shared system in the morning. She said it without heat, just information. The kind of information someone gives you when they've spent 2 years cataloging the playbook. Then we moved tonight, I said. There was one more section in the folder. The last thing Mara hadn't shown me yet, and I could tell from the way she paused before reaching for it that this was the piece that had cost her something to assemble. It was a set of screenshots. Private messages, Slack direct messages pulled from Derek's account by an IT contact at the company who had their own reasons for wanting a record, and had retrieved them through channels Mara described only as documented and defensible. I made a note not to ask further questions about the channels. She handed me Derek's messages to me first. I recognized fragments, pieces of the one-on-ones and check-ins I'd had with him over 2 years, largely unremarkable on their own. I read what he'd said about Mara in those private windows, in the specific context of a manager speaking confidentially to a direct report, small, careful, deniable statements. Implications wrapped in concern, seeds pressed into soil with the flat of a friendly palm. Mara's been raising concerns about team dynamics with my supervisor. I wanted to give you the heads up in case it shifts how you read her in meetings. Just between us, there was some pushback from Mara around the attribution on the Callaway pitch. I handled it, but I thought you should know it came up. I think Mara may be positioning for the lead role I know you've been working toward. Wanted you to have fair warning. Nothing actionable. Nothing I could have pointed to and named as a lie, just seeds, delivered in the confidential space where there's no reason to cross-check them, from a person whose authority made them credible. I looked at the messages Derek had sent to Mara. The shape was identical. Mirror image construction. Different names. She's been asking to pull the original proposal files. I think she's building a case around attribution. I wanted you to be aware. I handled something she raised about the Meridian presentation. Thought you deserved fair warning that it came up. She's been having conversations at the level above me. I don't know the full content, but I thought you should know. He'd been running 2 separate private narratives simultaneously for 2 years, telling each of us that the other was a threat, in enough detail to be credible, in enough vagueness to be deniable, in the specific and sealed space of a private channel where there was no way for either of us to know what the other was being told. He didn't compete with us, he managed us against each other. I set the screenshots down. We were never actually, I started. No, Mara said. The Callaway pitch. When I thought you'd taken. I didn't. She said it without emphasis. Not defensive. Just the fact. Placed quietly on the table between us. And you thought I was building a case against you. For 8 months. She looked down at the table. I've been in rooms with you for 2 years, in the specific posture of someone managing a threat. Tracking what you said in meetings. Keeping distance. She paused. You were in those rooms doing the same thing. 2 people in the same building, both operating at slightly elevated alert, both reading the other's ordinary professional behavior as evidence of something that had been invented for each of them before they'd ever genuinely spoken, both constructing a rival from material that had been handed to them, pre-assembled, by the same source. He'd kept us exactly suspicious enough of each other that the idea of talking, of comparing notes, of trusting, would never naturally occur to either of us. Because you don't organize with the person you've been told is angling for your position, you protect yourself from her. We were better at our jobs than he was. We were better at his job than he was. That was the whole thing. That had always been the whole thing. It was 11:47 when Mara's laptop made a sound she'd been half expecting. She looked at it. Her expression didn't change, which was, I had learned in the past 2 hours, how she registered information she'd already prepared for. Drive access revoked, she said. Courtesy notification from IT. Routine security audit. She closed the laptop. That's him. We had the folder. We had 2 personal drives. We had original meeting notes, 5 documented cases with names and timelines, a voice memo Mara had recorded 2 months ago of a conversation where Derek referenced managing the optics of the Joanna situation in terms that required context to be fully damaging and contained that context in the memo. We had the Slack screenshots. We had the 11:03 voicemail. We had something he had not accounted for. The 2 of us, in the same room, at the same table, no longer looking at each other from across a competition he had designed. Who is Officer Hendricks? I asked. 11 years at the company, he and Derek have lunch. She looked at me. That's why Derek requested him specifically. Can we request a different officer? You can file a formal request for reassignment before the meeting time, with documented grounds. She folded her hands on the table. The grounds would be documented evidence of a relationship between the filing party and the reviewing officer constituting a conflict of interest. Do we have that? We have enough to formally raise the question. And raising it formally, in writing, before 9 a.m., means HR has to address it before the meeting can proceed. She paused. It doesn't have to be airtight. It has to be credible enough that moving forward without addressing it creates liability for the company. This was the kind of thinking I had spent 2 years attributing to calculation, to someone who played the room and planned 3 moves ahead and did it in your direction. I understood now it was competence. She was good at her job. She had always been good at her job. That was the specific thing Derek had spent 2 years trying to make me see as a threat to me, when it was only and always a threat to him. We draft the email now, I said. Yes. We send it before midnight. Yes. She opened her laptop. There is a particular quality to work done at midnight under genuine stakes, a focus that doesn't arrive during ordinary hours, because ordinary hours always carry the option of returning to something, of sleeping on it, of looking again in the morning. At midnight, with a 9 a.m. deadline, those options have a clean edge. You know exactly what matters and what doesn't, because everything that doesn't has been stripped away by the pressure of the clock. We wrote 4 paragraphs, not aggressive, not emotional. A formal request, in the precise language of HR procedure, for postponement of the scheduled review and reassignment of the reviewing officer, citing documented conflicts of interest and attaching the first 8 pages of Mara's file as supporting evidence. It named 5 prior cases. It named the altered meeting documentation with the specific comparison attached. It named the private message thread. It named the 11:03 voicemail. It named Derek. At 11:53 p.m. I hit send. We looked at the screen together. He'll see the delivery notification, Mara said. Yes, I said. He'll know. Yes. We weren't rivals, we were just the 2 people in the building who scared him the most. The auto reply came at 12:04. Your communication has been received. A response will be provided within 1 business day or sooner in the case of time-sensitive matters. Where a scheduled review has been indicated, all review processes may be subject to postponement pending procedural assessment. I read it twice. Pending procedural assessment. That's the postponement language, Mara said. It's not a guarantee, but it means the system flagged it. A human will have eyes on it before 9. Derek called at 12:37. I let it ring. He called again at 1:15. Second voicemail notification. I looked at it as a unit of documentation rather than a communication, and I noted the time and set it aside. Mara fell asleep again by 1:45. Back on the couch, intentionally this time, blazer properly folded, phone face up beside her with the alarm set for 7. I sat in the chair across from her, the same chair I'd occupied when she first woke up, and looked at the folder on the coffee table and thought about 2 years of proximity to someone I'd moved around in the specific posture of someone managing a competitor. I thought about all the meetings, the conference tables and the presentations and the quarterly benchmarks and the particular way I'd learned to track her position in a room without appearing to track it, because that's what you do when you've been told, in careful and deniable pieces, that someone is working against you. You become fluent in a language of threat that the other person doesn't know you're speaking, and they become fluent in the same language pointed at you, and you both spend years in rooms together reading each other through lenses you were both handed by the same person. He'd kept us looking horizontally, at each other, so neither of us would think to look up. I slept in the chair for 3 hours. When Mara's alarm went off at 7, she was already awake. "Anything from HR," I said. She turned her phone toward me. "The review scheduled for 9 a.m. Thursday has been postponed pending procedural review. A senior HR officer will contact you directly within 24 hours. Officer Hendricks has been recused from this matter pending an internal conflict of interest assessment. Recused. Pending an internal conflict of interest assessment. He's recused," I said. "He's recused," she said. The senior HR officer called at 9:43 a.m. Her name was not Hendricks. She had clearly read the email and the attached file, and came to the call with the specific quality of attention of someone who understands they are looking at something serious and is building a record as the conversation moves. She was on the phone with me for 41 minutes. She was on the phone with Mara for 32 minutes after that. She asked questions precisely, confirmed details carefully, and said nothing about outcomes, because that was not how procedure worked, and we had not expected it to be. What she said at the end of my call was this, in the language of someone choosing each word with full awareness of its weight: "The documentation you've provided raises concerns that extend well beyond the scope of today's scheduled review. You should expect to hear from this office with a more comprehensive assessment." The comprehensive assessment came in 36 hours. I will not describe the full process in detail, because the full process was months of institutional machinery moving at the pace institutional machinery moves, which is not fast, and which has its own particular difficulty, distinct from the difficulty of the crisis that initiates it. What I will tell you is the shape of the outcome. Derek was placed on administrative leave within the week. The formal investigation took 11 weeks. The altered meeting documentation was noted in the official finding as inconsistent with versions preserved in automated system backups. The shared drive had maintained a backup record he had not known about, which meant the alterations were documented not only by Mara's paper copies, but by the company's own infrastructure. The 5 prior cases were reviewed. 3 of the women engaged formally with the process, 2 chose not to, and the investigation proceeded with what it had. Derek resigned before the investigation formally concluded. The company did not contest the resignation. The complaint against me was withdrawn, not found unsubstantiated, withdrawn, which is the distinction between a verdict and an erasure. It does not appear in my record. I asked HR to confirm this in writing. The confirmation took 4 days to arrive, and I kept it in 2 places, because Mara had spent 2 years teaching me, without knowing she was teaching me, that the only safe place for a document is somewhere he doesn't have access to. There is an aftermath to these things that doesn't make it into the version people tell afterward. The weeks during which the investigation was active and Derek was on leave and everyone in the office knew something was happening without knowing what, and the particular experience of being looked at differently, not with suspicion exactly, but with a recalibration, by people who'd spent 2 years looking at me through the lens Derek had handed them. That's its own kind of difficult. Not as difficult as the alternative, but present, and real, and worth naming. "Get everything in writing," Mara told me, the morning the call came. Every time, every outcome, in writing. It was the most useful piece of professional advice I'd received in 2 years, which is a strange thing to have come from the person I'd spent 2 years believing was my competition. "For what it's worth," I said to her, somewhere in the weeks that followed, sitting across a table covered in documentation, in the clean and still slightly unfamiliar context of actual collaboration, "I thought you were the most formidably prepared person I'd ever gone up against." She looked at me. "I thought you were the most frustratingly perceptive person I'd ever had to work around." Had to work around. "Because I thought you were against me," she said. "Which you weren't. Which I wasn't." We sat with that for a moment. He needed us to hate each other, she said. And then, quietly, in the specific register of someone who has reached the end of something very long, we were better at this. Here is the thing about having run a 2-year race on a course designed to make you run against the person in the next lane. I was not wrong to care about the work. I was not wrong to be ambitious, to take the accounts and the pitches and the documentation seriously, to feel the pressure of the standard I was trying to meet. None of that was wrong. What I couldn't have known, without the evidence Mara had spent 2 years building, was that the standard itself had been designed to keep me looking sideways rather than upward, that the benchmark I was perpetually not quite clearing was being tended by the person who needed me not to clear it. That's the particular manipulation that works on people who are good at what they do. It doesn't land on people who are coasting. It lands on people who care enough to feel inadequacy as real pressure, who will keep running toward the bar without stopping to ask who said it or why it keeps moving. Ambition aimed slightly wrong at a target someone else arranged, and the cruelest part of it is that the running itself is real. The work you do, the effort you put in, the legitimate striving toward something, all of it is real and measurable and yours. What isn't yours is the direction you've been pointed. I think about those 2 years often, the conference rooms, the way I'd learned to track Mara's position without appearing to track it, the way she'd been doing the same thing toward me, both of us fluent in a language of threat we'd each been taught by the same teacher, spoken at each other across rooms where we were actually the same thing. Mara is not my closest friend. I want to say that honestly, because these things tend to resolve into something neater than the reality of it, and the reality is that 2 years of constructed tension leaves a residue that doesn't simply lift because the construction is exposed. It's not resentment. It's a careful recalibration, a trust built not on the warmth of friendship but on the specific evidence of character under pressure. She put her file, 2 years of careful documentation, on the table in a situation where using it cost her something. That's a different foundation than liking each other. It's a more durable one. She still has the folder. Updated now with the outcome documentation, the formal findings, the written confirmation. She keeps it because institutions have short memories, and because somewhere right now someone is in the middle of the same thing we survived, not knowing the pattern has a name, not knowing anyone else has the map, and documentation is what transforms a felt experience into a provable one. The last thing she said when she left my apartment that first morning, after the email sent, after the confirmation came, after the 7 a.m. alarm and the coffee and the recusal notice, was this. "You should have had the Harwood account," she said. "The original pitch was yours. I didn't know that until I found the backup files. I know it now. I didn't say anything back. There wasn't a right thing. Some things are too late to undo, and the right response is to not pretend otherwise. What I want to ask you before you go, have you ever realized that the person you thought was standing in your way was actually standing in the same place you were, both of you looking up at the same obstacle from different sides, each convinced the other was the problem? And have you ever thought back on someone you were certain didn't like you and wondered, now, whether someone else had a very specific reason to make sure you believed that? If those questions pulled something real to the surface, a person, a workplace, a version of this you recognized from somewhere in your own life, write it in the comments. I want to hear it. And if this one found you when you needed it, subscribe. There are more waiting.